This is World at War 85, Storming the Gap by Lock and Load Publishing, the first game from this publisher that I've actually bought. And thus, so far, I'm really pretty impressed with it. This is called Storming the Gap because World at War 85, and if you put the pieces together, it's just that sort of standard hypothetical scenario of the Warsaw Pact, Soviet Union, blah blah blah, invading Western Europe with the Fulda Gap as a sort of focal battlefield. And or at least I'm assuming that's the case. It comes with this massive sort of scenario module rules and scenarios book, which I've not actually opened as yet. It comes with loads of stuff, play aids and counter sheets, and quite a few maps, which you'll see stacked over there, and yeah, loads more stuff in the box. Anyway, I haven't actually ventured into any of that because I've taught myself the rules and then played through a scenario that comes in this core rulebook, which is also the scenario in the starter kit that you can buy, and it's called something like a matter of bridges or something like that, a question of bridges. Let's see if we can find it in here. Yeah, sorry about, here we go, a matter of bridges. So this is what I've been setting up and working through. I've played it once, had a really good time with it, and am now going to play it again, just trying a slightly different plan. The Americans got overrun first time I played this, possibly because I set them up very poorly. So this is a platoon level tactical game. That means you have to understand things like, you know, terrain effects very, very carefully, and you have to understand and be able to take a view on things like line of sight and cover and stuff like that. The basic premise is that this bunch of American units down there is trying to defend the four locations here, 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 and here. That's a north-south marker up over there. They're trying to defend those four cities from this bunch of Soviet forces, which are coming on these two roads down here, here, and here. And let's see if I can find some tweezers or something to point with. And so the Americans are setting up north of a line which I've marked with the two ops complete markers, but you can see a line there. They've got to set up north of that, so that side of that, and prevent the Soviets from taking as many of those four locations as they can in 11 turns. So the Soviet forces really aren't under that much time pressure. So what do the Americans have? They have a headquarters, a squad weapon. Well, you can see there it's an infantry weapon. It's some TOW anti-tank guided missiles. They've got some Dragon anti-tank guided missiles with a range of 4 compared to 13 for the TOW. They've got 2 troop carrier M113s, 2 infantry platoons, and then they've got a single platoon of M1 Abrams, a section of jeeps with more TOW missiles on them, and a self-propelled 105mm mortar. Fabulous. These counters look like they're covered in numbers, and they are, but they're very nicely designed, and these numbers are all very, very useful. So if I were to give you an example, what you've got up here is a range of 13. This is where you put your armor piercing. This is where you put your high explosive. This is where you put your own armor. That will be your move in there, and this is where you put your assault. So this is 13 range. They've got 4 dice, or a firepower of 4, hitting on 4s, so that's the to hit number. That's the number of dice. So 4 dice hitting on 4s, and it's a sort of bucket of dice system. The green tells us that it's a missile, and therefore subject to ammo depletion. Similarly here we've got a 4-3-4, range of 4 rather than 13, 3 dice hitting on 4s, ammo depletion. If we were to look at something like the M1 Abrams, we've got an orange number in there. That tells us that the gun has got stabilisation, which means it doesn't suffer as bad a penalties if the unit moves and fires. 11 range, 4 dice sitting on 5s, but is effective while moving because of the orange number, or more effective, or less effective, depending on how you want to look at it. High explosive, 5 range, 3 dice on 5s. Again, I think that means it's stabilised down here. Armour saves, it's got heavy armour, the black number, heavy armour, 4 dice hitting on 5s, 6 movement points. Assault, 2 dice hitting on 4s. This is more TOW, so 13, 4, 4. Standard, what seems to be a standard array for TOW missiles. S, soft armour, 6 move. And over here we've got a high explosive attack of 3 dice sitting on 5s with a range of 25. The thing can either be able to see the target itself, or it can utilise a spotter to call in the shots. So that gives you an idea of this sort of layout, and the fact that the colours mean various things on the counter. You've got things like this orange triangle here, which means the Abrams has got composite armour, which gives it bonuses against anti-tank guided missiles. You've got a grey dot there that tells you that this is firing it indirectly, and so on. So the graphic design on the counters is really nice in that it tells you everything you need to know, and therefore you don't have to go fumbling around with charts and so on, looking at what your units are capable of. So this lot are going to set up. Now I ought to also discuss these HQs, and these weapons in this game can be deployed as you kind of see fit where you want them. HQs, once they're deployed, can kind of move around within your sort of lines, basically, as long as they're not trying to move through enemy units. So they're quite abstract. It sort of represents whatever it would be, battalion level assets being sort of deployed in certain areas, but they basically give you a dice bonus for a roll, in this case 2 dice. So popping the HQ down isn't a sort of physical representation of an HQ. It's like higher level HQ assets just being added to certain units to give them a hand. And with these kind of infantry extra weapons, they basically sit in a holding box, and as and when you want to add them to the battlefield, you essentially can for free just say, by the way, these infantry happen to be armed with these rather nasty TOW missiles. And that's great because the way it looked to me and felt to me first time round was that it gave a great feeling of fog of war, and it prevented that sort of godlike battlefield view where you knew exactly who was where and what they were capable of, because these infantry at some point are likely suddenly to find themselves with TOW and Dragon anti-tank guided missiles as they see fit. So these guys begin the game up in these holding box here, this holding box up here for the NATO and allies. So the HQ starts up there, and the TOW and the Dragon, and you'll see similarly the Russians have got their own HQ and some Stinger 10-3-4 anti-tank guided missiles. Not quite as good as the TOW, better than the Dragon. So that leaves us with this lot, and we have to figure out a plan. So having talked for 10 minutes about this, I'm just going to pause and perhaps place some units down, and then come back and talk about my thinking, and then possibly revise that thinking as I talk myself out of what I've just done. So one of the key elements of this game is that it's essentially a chit pool game, but the chits have been replaced with cards. So a turn consists of a deck of cards which can activate either the American formation or the Soviet formation, or be an end of turn card. And well, in more complex scenarios, they can also call in aircraft and call in random events and call in electronic warfare and all kinds of things. But essentially, you're shuffling a deck of cards for the turn, and then drawing cards to determine who's got the next activation. In this case, we've got one American formation and one Soviet and two end of turn cards or end of ops cards or whatever they're called. So the number of cards you get for your formation is a way of representing the command and control strength. So at the moment the Russians have one card in the deck, the Americans have two, and there are two end of turn cards. So the Americans are more likely to get drawn at any given time and more likely to get two activations in a turn. They're not guaranteed, because you could draw an end of turn straight off and then the Russians and then another end of turn, for example. But you could draw, but the probabilities favour the Americans for, or NATO and the Americans for getting more activations. However, in this game, from turns 2 and 3, the Russians get an additional card shuffled into the deck, that one there, and so they will then be on parity for a couple of turns in terms of activations. And that's important when thinking about what you want to do, because you're trying to weigh up how likely it is that you're going to get turns. We also didn't take a look at these tracks. There are lots of tracks on these play aids. We've got a turn track and a weather track. We don't have weather or squall or anything or mud in this scenario, but we do have some off-board artillery assets for the Soviets. They've got two high explosive barrages, 3 dice hitting on 4s. That's what this marker here tells us. They also can lay down a couple of smoke barrages, which will lay down 3 smoke counters. And smoke completely blocks line of sight, so those are really useful. So with all that in mind, I've had a look at a NATO US setup here, and so when I first played this scenario, I put these M1 Abrams where these infantry are, and I was thinking, well, they're on a hill, so they can see over a lot of like this blocking terrain, like the city here and the woods here. They wouldn't, there'll be blind hexes behind some of this terrain a long way away, but they can certainly see into all this clear area in here, and that will give them a good chance of blowing something up as it advances with some opportunity fire. Well, what happened was that the Russians rolled onto the board, because the Russians start with a free initiative action to get the game going. The Russians rolled onto the board, the Abrams missed, and the Russians drew their card straight away and blew the hell out of the M1 Abrams platoon with Saga missiles, and that was the end of that. And I'd set all the rest of the Americans up sort of backfield, because I was expecting to do some damage with the Abrams and then get an American activation and withdraw it back across the hill out of line of sight and reposition it. Actually, what happened was that it missed and then got shot to pieces before it ever moved, and things went downhill for the Americans from then on. What I've done this time then is set up the infantry in the same spot, but knowing that they can just drop some TOW missiles onto themselves, and although they are subject to ammo depletion and so on, they will guard that, in fact a bigger area, because they're range 13 rather than the Abrams range of 11, and that could be very, very effective in covering this area. And also the Russian Sagas can't be used against infantry, therefore they're against vehicular targets only, so they're having to use this rather terrible 3 range 2 dice on 5s against infantry, or call in artillery strikes, or use these tanks that they've got, 625. So they haven't got anything, their infantry 225s, they haven't got anything particularly devastating against infantry. The best they've got is artillery, and so I'm hoping that having some infantry there, with which we will then arm up with missiles, assuming they survive, will help slow down the Russian advance. And then we've got the M1 Abrams, which, as we learned earlier, has got the orange number, which means it can move up to the crest line of the hill and open fire with very few penalties. I put the tow Jeep up there as well so that it can do the same. It will suffer a lot of penalties for moving and firing, but there's very little I can do about that. In fact, I might put it a bit further forward so that it can still, half move up to say here and fire. And then I've put the self-propelled mortar back there. I've put just an troop carrier back here, just as again on a hill, just as a kind of spotter for if this gets cracked. Well, hopefully we can spot still for the self-propelled mortar. And then we put some infantry in here in rather closer terrain where I might drop the Dragon anti-tank guided missiles down to defend that. So that's sort of the US plan. Okay, another thing to mention is that this card is designated formation. Most of the formation cards have 3 numbers on them: a morale value, HQ command range when the HQ is undisrupted or undamaged, and a damaged range. And for the Americans, it's 5. And what that means is that when you pop your HQ on the board, you then have to check, you place that with one of your units, but then you have to check that everything's in command range, and if it's not, you have to make a die roll to see whether units are out of command, and if they are, they're apart from opportunity fire, they can't do anything, and that's very bad. And so it's good to have some cohesion. And so the plan is to use this troop carrier on the back of the hill here, well out of harm's way, as the HQ, and that won't give us bonus dice on dice rolls, but what it will mean is that everything we've got on the board will always be in command range in these positions, and I'm hoping that that will be more valuable than the 2 dice on a dice roll, and in actual fact guaranteeing that everything we've got can act in a turn will prove to be, over time, very useful. Because what I found with the Russians was that they could rush forward all across the board, but their range is smaller, it's only 4, and the HQ got damaged, and then it was only 3, and they spent a lot of time with 2/3 of their units out of command in any given turn. It's just they had so many of them that they could still get quite a lot done. So that's my plan for the Americans. Slow down the initial charge with tow-armed infantry, with the tow-armed Jeeps and the M1 Abrams ready to move up, and the infantry also acting as spotters for the 105mm mortar. And we'll start off with that and see how we get on. So now I have to come up with a plan for the Soviets, who can look at this setup and obviously make their own judgments about what they're going to be facing, and we'll try and come up with a plan for them. Okay, an initiative move here for the Soviets in this scenario at World of War 85, a matter of bridges. Yeah, I've been very cautious. I've brought 6. They've got ops complete markers on them, but under each of these is just a Soviet infantry platoon, and I've brought these on because and left our BMP-1s and our T-62s off map for now, because there's really nothing that the Americans have got apart from calling in artillery strikes from the 105mm mortar. But there's nothing else really that the Americans have got that can impact this infantry at this range. And the threat of the Saga missiles going down, especially supported with an HQ,
will make the Americans very wary of advancing their M1 Abrams and tow jeeps up onto this ridgeline where they'd be in sight. So we're hoping that the threat of these assets keeps the Americans honest in terms of advancing up and trying to blow us up. And then what we're hoping is that we either call in some artillery on this infantry here, or we drop some smoke into this area and use that then to cover the advance of our vehicles onto the map into positions where we can engage at ranges of our choosing and with numerical superiority, and hopefully with the action economy perhaps balanced up with our additional card and so on. So what I don't want to do is try and rush all this stuff onto the map, because it's got nowhere to go really. It's going to end up in clear terrain in here. It's going to get shot at by tow missiles, and then if an American card comes up, they get to bump forward and shoot us again, and then if another American card comes up, then they get to reset and shoot us again, and we could all be blown up, in very, very quickly. Things explode in this game remarkably quickly. So I don't fancy just bumping 9 vehicles or 9 platoons worth of vehicles out into the open here and watch it all explode just because the card draws weren't good. And the other thing is, what are we doing if let's say our vehicles did get up here? What are we shooting at? We're still not going to have anything very effective against this infantry, and we won't have lines of sight on the Abrams or the Jeep, so platoons, so they'll just be choosing when to engage, and it just looks like a fool's errand just to charge forward and hope for the best. So instead we're going to try and use our artillery to ease ourselves onto the map, and see what kind of shape we're in once we've done that, or at least just see if our artillery comes down where we want it, and see whether we're getting shelled by American artillery. So yeah, that's the plan. So that is the end of the initiative phase, and now we go straight from an initiative phase into an operations phase. So it's not like a full turn, it's like you get an activation. See, it says here initiative phase, turn 1 only, and then you go straight into operations phase, which means you draw a card. So top card of this deck is end of operations. Okay, so we go into the next card, which is Bravo Company, and this is good for us as the Russians because we haven't given them targets, and so they can sit there waiting for op fire, but if they move they're going to get ops complete markers, and those ops complete markers prevent you from opportunity firing. So anything that doesn't stay still won't be able to opportunity fire. However, the Americans will want to do something aggressive, because they will want to attempt to spot and mortar fire. So let's sort that out. Okay, let's do this NATO US activation sort of properly. So the first thing we should do is, when we draw a formation card, is refresh all that formation's units. That means take off any ops complete or out of command markers. Well, they haven't activated and they haven't been out of command, so there's none of those. The next thing we do is do a command and leader step. So we drop the HQ, we deploy our HQ so that we can get things in command. So here's our HQ, we'll just deploy it, and we can deploy it with any of our units. And a couple of options here. We could go where we'd intended, which will keep everything in command,
or we could drop our HQ down with this infantry platoon here. And the reason to do that would be, well, if we're going to call in artillery strikes, we wouldn't have to make a spotter check in order to do it, because the HQ spots for artillery automatically. The downside is that we'd then be putting our HQ right in the firing line from the artillery that we're fairly sure we're going to take back, because even if we take out an infantry unit with an artillery strike, where there's still enough to spot straight back and bring some artillery back down on us. So I'm going to do what I had planned previously and drop our HQ into our nice behind the lines location here, where it can keep everything neatly in command. So now we check whether things are in command. This says we have our undamaged HQ has a range of 5 hexes, and we can count out 1, 2, 3 out here, 1, 2, 3, 4 out there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 back there, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over here. So we're all in command. We don't have to make any rolls for out of command stuff. And now we would, if anything were disrupted, we'd roll to try and remove disruption. We could do off-board artillery strikes. Well, we don't have any off-board artillery. Our artillery is on board. So we can't do that. And now we do activations. So what we're going to do is an indirect fire activation, essentially. So we are going to take an indirect fire action by our self-propelled mortar here. Got a range of 25, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. The map's only 20 long, so I think we can pretty much hit everywhere on the map. Our infantry unit here is going to attempt to act as a spotter, and we're going to try and hit this infantry unit in the open down here. So that's our target. I'll just remove the X to show it's the target. In fact, no, I don't have to do that. I can drop a fire for effect marker on there to show that that's the target. So in order to do this, we have to make a spotter check. Our infantry checks for line of sight, and line of sight rules for this are reasonably straightforward. Basically, he's on level 2, these woods here and these woods here and this city are level 1, and where you're higher than an obstacle, there's a blind spot equal to the range to that obstacle, basically. So if you're 1 higher, if you're 2 or more higher, it's only 1 hex blind spot. But so, for example, if this guy was looking down this way, because this is 1, 2, 3, 4 away, there'd be a 1, 2, 3, 4 hex blind spot, but he can see into this area. And similarly through here, there is some woods here, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so this area in here is visible. So he makes a spotter check, which is basically a morale check. Our morale is that number there, 7. So let's just roll a couple of blue dice for NATO. And he needs a 7 or less. And he's got a 2. And that means he has successfully spotted. And now we can drop our artillery onto that infantry. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is roll for scatter. And it scatters on a 6 on a d6, otherwise it hits the target. We get a 3, we're on target with our mortar, and we can see up here that we are doing 3 dice needing 5s to hit. So I'll roll 3 dice, and that's 2 hits. Okay. And then we're going to look at saves for the infantry, and I don't think they get any. They are a soft target, you can see there, S, and a soft target, I believe, in the infantry in the open only get saves or defensive rolls based on sort of terrain and so on. I'm going to just check this quickly and come back. Yeah, I was exactly right. Infantry and unarmoured targets get a defensive roll if they've got a terrain defensive bonus or if they've got concealment. You need to not be ops complete to have concealment, so they don't have that. You also need to be in defensive terrain, and they've got no defensive bonus. They're in clear terrain, so they've just taken 2 hits, and that is enough to first disrupt them. The first hit causes a disruption, that's one of those, and the second hit causes an actual loss, and that's one of those. Okay, so they are disrupted, and we'll stack the ops complete back on them. Okay, and that puts an ops complete on that guy there. Beyond that though, what do the Americans want to do? Do they want to inch this stuff up? No, they don't, because they'll just be inviting the infantry then to snag some saggers and blow the crap out of them. So I think we want to stay where we are and see what happens next. So that was that activation. We flip another card, and it's an end of operations. Okay, so the Soviets haven't had a go. That's a disaster for the Soviets, by the way. They wanted an activation now. But what that means now is that we put this end of operations to one side and we put the Soviet HQ on it, and so we're only going to have one end of operations action in the deck, so the turn can't end until that HQ is on the board, basically, which means that the Russians must get a go this turn because they didn't get one in turn 1. And now we reshuffle the deck and we go again. Okay, so at the end of the turn you take off all the ops complete markers and the out of command markers, and you flip over smoke and you do stuff like that. So we've reset the board, we've shuffled the deck. First card up is the Russians. So the Russians would take off all their ops complete, but it's the start of the turn, so they've not got any. So now we take their HQ off this end operations card and we will be shuffling that into the deck after the Soviet activation, or this first Soviet activation. And remember, the Soviets just put a second activation card into the deck from on turn 2. So we get to put our HQ down. Now we are going to be calling in off-board artillery with this HQ, and this HQ is the only thing we've got that can act as a spotter for off-board artillery. So we want to be fairly careful with it. I'm not tempted to put it in open ground, although I was planning to kind of pop him in here. That is open ground. Although we are going to get to move. Yeah, that's interesting. I could pop him in here and then possibly move the infantry after we've done some spotting, because spotting doesn't count as an action. So that is an idea. It might be a very bad one, but it does keep more of my guys. It does keep more of my guys automatically in command, and our morale is only 6, which means that a 2d6 roll isn't even on the average of 7. So if we're having to make rolls to be in command, we're on 43%, which isn't great. 2 and 5. So I think we are going to take a substantial or something of a risk here and pop our HQ down here. And then we'll check for command. So he's in command. We've got a range of 4, 1, 2, 3. So we're in command there, in command there, in command here, 1, 2, 3, 4 in command here. The disrupted unit here has to make a roll to be in command and gets a 10 and is out of command, but can roll to lose his disruption despite being out of command, but he gets a +1 on the dice roll, so he needs a 5 or less, and he's got a 5. Well, so he's lost his disruption marker, but he's out of command. Okay, out of command means he can't do anything, and disrupted means he can't do anything. He can now not do anything only once. But the disruption doesn't go away at the end of the turn, whereas the out of command does, so that was helpful. So having done all that, we now get to start doing we can do our off-board artillery strikes. So the first thing we want to do, and we get 2. You can call in 2 off-board artillery strikes in this phase, and I think we want to do that. In fact, we definitely want to do that. So the first thing we'll do is drop a fire for effect marker down straight onto this infantry here, and we're going to call in some high explosives. That's a high explosive strike on there. We don't have to make a spotter check because our HQ spots automatically, so we just have to make a scatter roll, and we don't scatter. So we've got an HQ effect or a high explosive effect of 3 dice needing 4s to hit. We'll drop down 1 strike, so 3 dice needing 4s to hit. That's just 1 hit, unfortunately, and the infantry do not have any save. They're in open ground. Oh no, they do. They are concealed. No, they're not. They're not in concealment terrain. So they just take a disruption for that. Okay. And the other thing we'll do then is drop in a fire for effect marker in here, and we've got line of sight to that because a single blocking hex, which this city is the line of sight runs straight down the hex side, and there's only if both of these were blocking hexes, then obviously it would be blocked, or if there was another one blocking hex here, then 2 blocking hexes I think would cause the line of sight to be blocked, even if they're on the same side, but just one does not. So we can drop a fire for effect in there. We can roll to see if it scatters. It doesn't, and so what we're going to do is use up one of our smoke barrages, and we're going to drop 3 smoke in here. That has to be one of the smoke hexes, but we can then choose 2 adjacent hexes, and so we will choose this one and this one, and we will essentially block lines of sight off this hill into this area, and this is like 20 high. It's just a wall of smoke, so there's no looking over it or anything like that. So that was our off-board artillery action, and now we go into our actual actions, and I'm going to have some time to think about this. So there we go, you can see some fairly aggressive Soviet moves onto the board here with BMPs, the infantry. Some of the infantry's moved up, but these are the T, whatever their bad tanks are. These are very poor, or quite poor quality tanks, and the T-62s. I think they are not very good anyway. Certainly nothing like the Abrams, sort of 2 generations back or something from the Abrams. They're really quite poor. But we've left these infantry where they are because they carry the threat of having the Sagas and doing opportunity fire onto this ridge line if the Americans move anything up there, so we need to maintain that threat. So those infantry are staying there. I moved the HQ over here into these woods, firstly to get it out of artillery fire, secondly to give it a save if it does come under attack somehow, and thirdly because this is a nice central position within range of most of the stuff. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, our 4 range is within range of everything apart from this guy here. So yeah, that's our activation done with the Soviets. Let's flip one more card over and see what's coming up next. It is the Americans. Okay, so they get to replace their HQ. They don't want to do that, I don't think. Everything's in command and they like it that way. They do get to roll to see whether they can undisrupt that infantry unit. So let's make a quick morale check for him, and he gets a 9 and does not become undisrupted, so he remains disrupted. And now it's into the action phase for the Americans. Here in the American formations activation then, there was a clear line of sight, a tricky but clear line of sight for this troop carrier on the hill here, straight down the hex spine here, past these woods and into this hex here. I think I need to check whether that's a viable, whether the M113 is actually a legal spotter unit, but I think it is. I've no reason to believe it isn't, put it that way. Let's just have a check on this card here. There's all kinds of player aid unit card things. Let's see if I can find an M113 on here. And I can't see it anywhere. Maybe it's on this one. Can't see it on there either. Maybe it's on here. There we go, M113. So we can look across this chart and we can see what it, how many steps it's got and what type of armour it's got. And one of these columns says spot for off-board indirect fire, spot for on-board indirect fire, and here we've got spot for on-board indirect fire, and it comes down here and it says yes with 3 stars. May spot for on-board indirect fire actions if they perform a successful spotter check. So I rolled a spotter check, and that's the roll he got, which is an 8, which is higher than his morale of 7, and therefore he's failed the spotter check. Now that doesn't cost him anything, but it does mean that our unit here is now ops complete. He's tried to get a ranging in on the units they were trying to fire at and failed, so that fire for effect goes away. So another interesting little plan that we could have is with this smoke in here, that's making lines of sight across here rather difficult. We could, however, try and slide the Abrams here and then find a line of sight just down past the smoke down into this unit here in the woods, and that seems like if we're not taking shots like that, then what shots are we going to take, you know? So I think we're going to do this and move the M1 Abrams up here and into here, and then check for a line of sight just down there. Let's see if I can do this with the camera in my hand. It's likely to be a bit messy and the camera could go everywhere, but let's see. No, I can't do it with the camera in my hand, unfortunately. So I'll do it off camera and come back. Okay, there is a clear line of sight from the Abrams up here on the hill, down past these woods into this hex here. So he is now going to have a shot, and he has got 4 dice needing 5s. Now I think he's got his stabilised gun, means that he doesn't suffer any penalties for the move and fire action. If we come down here on this table, we find that NATO or NATO allied units with orange armour piercing, that's that number up there. In fact, it's showing us an M1 Abrams. It says if you've expended at least 1 movement point but up to half rounded down, you have no negative modifiers. So he has expended 2 movement points, which is less than half of his 6. No modifiers, so he can fire 4 dice needing 5s. Now this guy's in woods, but that gives him an extra defensive die. So he has got oh, he's infantry. Oh dear. Oh, I thought he was no, we can't do this against infantry because no, I'm going to have to take this back, unfortunately. I'm going to have to mulligan this because I was thinking that he was a BMP that we BMP-1 that we could shoot the main armament at, but if he's only infantry, we'd have to be shooting high explosive at him at long range, and that's, you know, going to be 3 dice on 6s, and that isn't a terribly interesting idea for me to become ops complete on at a spot where we may get picked off by anti-tank guided weapons somehow. So let's not do that. Do we have any other shots? The Jeep coming forward is simply going to get picked off by opportunity fire from the infantry down in these woods, so that seems like a very unwise thing to do. Likewise, the Abrams trying to come forward, he's just got all his lines of sight blocked by smoke. So we are going to have to sit tight, I think, and just try and harass the this advance with whatever artillery fire we can find lines of sight for. So I think at that point we are done, and we will get rid of this card. So we've had a Soviet card, an American card, and what we should have done is shuffle this end of operations in. So I'm going to do that, and then carry on drawing cards. Okay, the next card up was an end operations, and then we got a Russian formation card. So we're going to go into some Soviet advances again. So all the ops end and out of command markers are going to come off, and we're going to have a think about what we can do. So with the American card formation draw, they decided to keep their HQ in the same place, but failed on the roll to undisrupt this infantry unit. And that does go to show the how annoying and disruptive a disruption can be, is that that unit has failed 2 rolls now, and will go into the next turn disrupted. So, you know, as the Russians, I think they were slightly disappointed not to put some hits as well as the disruption on, but disruptions which last can be really effective. The Americans now have sort of things to think about. I don't think they can really spot anything. I don't think they've got lines of sight to anything that they can call an artillery strike on in this in this lot, and so they've got questions as to whether to move forward or whether to move back or whether to sit tight. It feels like in this game, from what I can tell, that moving into line of sight and giving your opponent the first shot with their opportunity attacks is hazardous, and especially if you're taking penalties on your shots because of moving and firing. So for example, if we took this tow jeep here and moved it out onto the ridge line here in order to get a nice clear shot into this T62, what we'd actually end up doing, it would be giving a free opportunity fire to this infantry that could add a Saga squad weapon, infantry weapon, to their stack, and then pop an opportunity fire shot straight across, and we'd be losing 2 dice on our attack. So instead of 4 dice with 4s to hit, we'd have 2 dice with 4s to hit, but we'd take a 3 dice with 4s to hit attack first, and if we were disrupted or took any hits, or even just disrupted, we'd be stop and ops complete before we even got the shot. So I don't fancy our chances of, especially given the soft armour on this thing, out in the open. We'd get a defensive die from being up in elevation level or higher than the attacker, but still 3 dice on 4s is averaging a hit and a half, and our save is on a 5 or 6, I think, for soft. That's not good, that's not good odds. We'll likely end up disrupted from that at best. The Abrams can roll in somewhere in here and shoot down here. Again, we'd be giving some infantry here a shot with a Saga. 3 dice on 4s, averaging a hit and a half. The M1 Abrams would have a lot of defense. It would have 6 dice on 5s. It would have 4 dice for its basic armour. It would have the dice for the being higher than the attack, and it would have a dice for its reactive armour against an anti-tank guided weapon. 6 dice on 5s would give it a fair chance of shrugging off that attack and then unleashing its 4 dice on the T62s. We're likely to end up in this exchange in a good place. And if we don't start to engage, when are we going to engage? Because we could just sit up on this hill and never engage. But the Russians could then, Soviet Union could then just go about the business of occupying all the cities that they need to, without bothering to engage the things on the hill, because neither of us have got lines of sight. And it's very unlikely that they're going to charge up this hill to engage us, because they don't need to take the hill, and because these anti-tank guided weapons that they've got, if I can find a BMP, that's an HQ on a tank. If I can find a BMP-1, which I can't, there we go. The anti-tank guided weapons that they've got have a minimum range of 3. This black triangle tells us that, amongst all the other symbology and colours and stuff. But yes, there's a minimum range of 3 on those anti-tank guided weapons. So if they charge up the hill here, they're inside the minimum range of their anti-tank guided weapons, so they're not going to want to run up the hill and engage us. They might have to try and assault up the hill to kill the infantry, and maybe close assaulting against the tanks is their best option. But if we're not going to fire at them, they don't need to do anything. They can just, work their way through the woods, work their way through here, stay in cover, grab that city, and move on. So, yeah, I'm wondering at what point we, as the Americans, make our move to engage. The thing is, if we do it now, they've got another turn with 2 activation cards. If we could hold on another turn to turn 3, and then get into turn 4, then the Soviets would be back down to 1. This card will come back out of the deck, and they'll be back down to 1 card, and we might be able to use our card advantage to time our assault on them when they're not quite as coordinated, which all all seems a bit like we're playing the gameplay mechanisms, but and that would be true, but I wouldn't. That's only because I'm not trying to then translate that back into a sort of real world justification or explanation or rationalization of what this is all representing. I can't be bothered to try and do that. It's doable. It's just not what I'm going to do on camera. So let's hold off then from placing ourselves in harm's way and see if we can get through to turn 4. That's the thinking from the US side. We haven't got any spotting to do, so we are just going to leave ourselves in a position where we don't seem to be under any great pressure right now, although with the Soviets have managed to advance with fairly minimal losses. So we're going to call it there. Americans aren't going to do anything, and we're going to get the end operations card and move into turn 3. I think I'm going to wrap up here though, because this feels like it's quite long, and I'll pick up turn 3 on the next video.